Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be your keynote speaker at this second Chinese Congress for Clinical Hypnosis. My name is Amir Raz, and I would like to share with you today some of the research that I've been doing over the past 3 decades with specific emphasis on some of my more recent work in the context of the clinical neuroscience of suggestion. And I would like to start with a visual demonstration, which I'm going to trigger for your entertainment pleasure. This is a movie that basically shows dancing lines. Now, if you look at these dancing lines very carefully, you'll see the two of them are sort of synchronized together, moving up and down, and the other ones are also moving up and down together. It's very difficult to see what's going on here until you impose some occluders. And when you put the occluders, these masks, you can see very clearly that there's some kind of a cogent motion going clockwise. As soon as I take the occluders out, again, the lines sort of, lose motion. Again, I put the occluders, you can see the motion going clockwise, and when I remove them again, they're going to disappear. This is called the occluded diamond task, and we know quite a bit about the psychophysics and the visual information that is being processed in the brain in order to create this kind of trick or this kind of illusion, whatever you want to call it. And not only that we know something about it, but it serves as a very interesting, a very nice paradigm in order to look at suggestion and the effects of suggestion in the brain. We don't have to do it only with rectangles. We can do it with triangles, and we can do it with different kinds of occluders. They don't have to be rectangular. They can be hexagonal. They can be, many other things. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, because I will try to argue and I'll try to demonstrate to you that much of the work that we're doing here at the Brain Institute, at Chapman University, at McGill University, at other locations around the world, has to do with what suggestion can and cannot do. Now, I will show you in just a few minutes that you can actually impose these occluders, the ones that you just saw, by giving hypnotic suggestion to individuals. And as a result of that, create a situation where people can actually see the motion in a task that is extremely challenging, very, very difficult to do visually. By giving people a hypnotic suggestion that the occluders are there, we're actually able to do something to their brain. Now, this is something that a lot of people confuse with something that has been described in the literature time and time again, which is hypnotic blocking or hypnotic inhibition. So I just like, I like this image very much. This is an image that I borrowed from Schmidt et al., German colleagues who published in 2017 scientific reports, yet another paper on hypnotic blocking. You can actually suggest to people that they can't see something. They cannot see a particular thing. So as if there's an object that is obstructing or occluding their field of view. But what we are doing here is very different. We are not obstructing the stimuli. We are adding information to the scene. And by adding information to the scene, we're actually turning a very difficult visual task into an easy one. Assuming that we can do this in multiple contexts, this can actually teach us something about learning also. It can teach us something about how we can take difficult tasks in general and, using our understanding of the psychophysics, turn these tasks into easier tasks, into more composable tasks. So the first thing that I wanted to share with you here in this particular demonstration is, what does it take? What does it take? Can we do something about, making something that is more difficult easier? And what we're having here is a situation where we have dancing lines, and we want to hypnotically superimpose the occluders on top of the dancing lines. It is very difficult to make sense what the dancing lines are doing when they're on their own. And as a result of the suggestion, we would like very much to see whether we can get, a very easy kind of motion detection or cogent motion identification, right? So that's what we want to do. Instead of giving the occluders physically present on the screen, like I showed you before, we want to create this mentally with people following or, basically going with a hypnotic suggestion. This is not an easy thing to do, and the work that I'm going to describe to you today is not work that I have done on a weekend or with, the help of one assistant. This is work that spans many decades and involves many, many people, and as I go through it, I might mention a few people altogether. Before I start describing the technical nature of this work, and I'll try not to get too technical throughout this talk. I just want to share with you some of the basic results. So the first result that I want you to understand is that if you're separating people into highly hypnotizables and into less hypnotizables, and there are many ways to do this with very good psychometric functions. So we can use the Stanford hypnotizability test, we can use the Harvard hypnotizability test. I usually use both in tandem, and I basically take people who are scoring very high on both, and those are my highly suggestible people, and people who score both low on these scales are people that I put in the other group of less hypnotizable people. You can see very clearly just looking at these results that highs have somewhat of a different profile of performance on these kind of things compared to lows. Not only that, but you can also appreciate very quickly, I hope, that this is not a singular effort. I've been doing this for many, many years, and I started out doing things with the Stroop Effect. What is the Stroop Effect? I just want to, make sure that we're all in the same boat. This is not going to be a lecture about the Stroop Effect, but I just want to make sure that people understand. So if I write, a particular word, let's say the word red, which is the name of a color in the English language, and I write it using a blue crayon, there's a little bit of a conflict here, because if I'm asking you to name the ink color, some people will say red because this is what is written, that's the semantic value. Some people will say blue because that's the ink color, and that's actually what I'm asking you to do. In the Stroop task, people are asked to sometimes name the ink color and sometimes name the word. It's very clear that you have interference here, because your brain is not sure whether they should say red or they should respond to the blue ink. This task that has been invented in the 1930s has been with us for so many papers and so many scientific investigations that we think that we understand something about it. About 20 years ago, I was able to demonstrate that this is not a unique phenomenon to Stroop. It can actually extend to other things. But the most important part here is that this is very replicable. So other people have tried it in different labs, in different locations, and multiple papers have come out since showing that you can, with suggestion, you can actually go and inhibit and regulate this very, very ballistic, automatic, involuntary thing that is called the Stroop effect, which is sort of a benchmark for selective attention. Now, can we do this with a different task, not just the Stroop? And the answer is yes, and I have shown it, for example, with the Mcgurk effect. For the Mcgurk effect, I'm going to show you a demonstration, a very brief demonstration, through a video clip that I've taken from all my Scandinavian colleagues. Look at the following clip and just listen very carefully as you look at it straight on the screen. Here is a situation where a person is going to make a few sounds, and I want you to be able to tell me what the sounds are. They're not going to be in any particular language, just regular sounds. Listen very carefully and watch at this person as he utters these sounds.
Ba 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 ba.
Great. Now that you have this particular sound in mind, which is sort of a da 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 da, let's try to see what happens when you listen to the exact same clip. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to replay the exact same clip again, only this time I'm asking you not to look. I'm asking you to close your eyes and then just to listen to this recording with your eyes shut. Here, I'm replaying it, and now I want you to just listen without looking.
Ba 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 ba.
If you are human, you should be in a situation where in the first demonstration you heard a sound that was closer to da da da, and in the second demonstration, although it's the exact same stimulus auditorily, you should have heard ba ba ba. This is the Mcgurk effect. The Mcgurk effect is named after Mr. Mcgurk, just like the Stroop effect is named after Mr. Stroop. And again, it's an example of a very strong ballistic automatic process that is very difficult to regulate. However, we showed that with hypnotic suggestion, you can actually regulate it by telling people that what they're listening to is very, 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 very keen. In other words, we are suggesting to them they have very strong hearing, very sharp crystal hearing. We were able to demonstrate that we were able to override some of the Mcgurk effect. This is very, very interesting because the Mcgurk effect is something that you can even see in newborn babies, in non-human animals such as monkeys or certain kind of monkeys, and even in very, very young humans. So there's something extremely ballistic about it. It doesn't even require reading. So from the Stroop, we were able to go to another level, the Mcgurk, and demonstrate that this is actually happening. When you look at the results that we got, again, the results are compelling in the sense that it's very clear when you're looking at highs and when you're looking at lows that the highs, the highly suggestible, are able to do things that the lows are not able to do. And that seems to suggest that, suggestion has something special that it does to the brains or the perception of people who are highly suggestible, as determined by these Stanford, Harvard scales for the purpose of this particular research. Now, I have, over the years, thought long and hard about what these things mean. And I thought about this along the lines of placebos in medicine. Placebos in medicine is a very interesting field where what you're thinking, your expectations, your mindset, your symbolic thinking, many of the things that you bring to the table inside your head sometimes determine your physiology, sometimes regulate your emotion, regulate your cognition, and sometimes even do something to your actions. So that's one approach to look at it like a very robust placebo effect. Another way to look at it would be to look at it through the lens of meditation. Now, meditation, to most people who are doing hypnosis, meditation is something that is a little bit unfamiliar. So the overlap between meditation and hypnosis to a lot of people is not entirely clear. It would be helpful to understand that in this book that I wrote with one of my doctoral students, Michael Lifshitz, who's now a postdoc at Stanford, it's very important to understand that meditation and hypnosis are not just overlapping processes in terms of their phenomenology. They're also interesting in terms of their histories, in terms of their cultural construction, and so on. So, for example, meditation is something that people do as part of a diet. It's like brushing your teeth. It's something that you do on a regular basis, on and on and on. It's a routine, quotidian kind of thing. Whereas hypnosis is more of something that you do for an acute intervention, for a particular problem, and so on. This is important to understand because we see actually slightly different things that are going on in the brain for people who are long-time meditators or expert meditators versus people who are highly suggestible. More recently, I came out with yet another book. This is by Oxford University Press, a book that just came out a few months ago on how to train your brain, where I basically begin to outline the scientific basis for what is happening in the brain of individuals who are changing their wiring, changing their behavior, changing the way that they program their behavior, that they sequence their behavior as a result of suggestion, as a result of change in diet, as a result of psychological treatment, as a result of motivational changes. This is very interesting because there's a lot of debate about how persistent or how sustainable these effects are, and also how generalizable they are. This particular book, again written with one of my doctoral students, Shada Rabipour in this particular case, discusses some of these things, and I want you to understand that these are all interesting offshoots of the problem from which we started, which is the occluded diamond test, which we're going to get back to momentarily. The last kind of tangent that I want to present to you, which is again related to the discussion that we're having, is that today we have technology, particularly research technology, that allows us to see what is happening inside of the brain without opening it up. So this kind of neuroimaging technology, if it's fMRI, if it's magnetoencephalography, if it's EEG, and optical imaging, many other techniques that are available, are not just toys that we are using in the lab. They can actually answer some very specific questions that we didn't have the opportunity to even ask previously, because we are now able to create scientific or experimental paradigms where we can tease apart, or we can actually focus very, very carefully on very subtle nuances of what is happening in the brain when you have a suggestion, when you don't have a suggestion, when you think that something is about to happen versus when you don't think that something is about to happen. Again, I've explored some of these themes in this book, which is called Casting Light on the Dark Side of Brain Imaging. Again, a very recent book that came out that, among other things, discusses some of the topics that we're talking about here. Finally, it's important to understand that the scientific community is a little bit suspicious, a little bit skeptical, and a little bit conservative when it comes to magical things such as hypnosis. It's very important to explain, especially to clinicians and to people who are coming into helping people with treatments, with interventions, and so on, that there's actually quite a good literature on some of the stuff that we're talking about that is published in some of the best journals. And what I try to do every now and then is write opinion pieces that are actually not meant so much for the hypnosis community, but are actually meant for the scientific community in order to understand, in order to appreciate how strong, how towering these effects are and the repercussions that they have, not just for clinical science, but also for research in general. The situation that I'm about to describe to you also has financial repercussions. And these financial repercussions have to do with the fact that meditation, for example, has a very long history maybe in the East and Eastern traditions, but in the West, it's a fairly new discovery, and people immediately monetize it. They immediately go and make money out of it, and they make an industry out of it. And it's very clear, it's very easy to see that these are money-making businesses in addition to their health, in addition to their psychological power. Meditation is a very close sister to hypnosis, and it has gotten a lot more press. It has gotten a lot more coverage in the trade journals, in the newspapers, and in general, people begin to appreciate meditation, mindfulness, yoga, contemplative practices a lot more than they appreciate hypnosis for all kinds of cultural reasons. It's important to understand that specifically when it comes to studying people who are highly hypnotizable, people who are very good meditators, it's very important to find the right people to study, because in many ways, highly hypnotizable people, like highly suggestible people or expert meditators, are people who are difficult to come by. And once you find them, you want to study them very carefully. In this particular case, a Tibetan monk, somebody who's been meditating for many, many years. And once you find these people, you can actually study them, both with EEG, with fMRI in this particular case, and the kind of brain signals that you can deduce or that you can collect from these people are largely reflective of a group of people who are, we think about them like neuropsychological patients. We think about them like, very special group of neurologically endowed individuals. When we do these kind of things, we see that it's very, very easy to find some brain signatures, or we are beginning to find some brain signatures that allow us to say something about what is different between the brains of people who are highly suggestible and the brains of people who are not so suggestible. And we can see these changes using all kinds of imaging experiments that we're doing, where we can identify the areas that are at baseline. In other words, when we're not doing anything, at baseline, the default mode is such that people who are highly suggestible show more activity or less activity in those particular areas. I have written extensively about what makes one person more or less suggestible than another. And I've also talked a little bit about the genetic makeup of these things, variations that have to do with other parameters, behavioral parameters, and the phenomenology of these things. It's important to explain, and it's important to appreciate, that there's another hidden element to hypnosis, and that is the psychology of magic, the psychology of misdirection, the psychology of deception. In many ways, when you are suggesting something to someone, you are not always telling the whole story. Sometimes you are hiding some information. This is something that magicians do quite a bit, particularly in Western cultures. Magicians can get away with it because it's part and parcel of the entertainment business. They are there in order to entertain you. So you're not going to come and complain to them, about deception. However, in some situations, for example, when a physician or when a researcher is trying to interact with a patient, the whole notion of deception becomes a lot more tricky. This is a special issue that I put together in Frontiers a few years ago. This is a snapshot, so you're seeing here 115,000 hits, but today I think it's way, over 250,000 hits. This is the idea that you can learn quite a bit about how suggestible people are just from doing some magic tricks and visual illusions on them. Good, so we've gone a whole circle here. We started with the task that I wanted to show you today, and we went a whole circle with talking about Stroop and about Mcgurk and about like all these other things and about placebos and about magic. And now I'm going to bring you back to the task. And to do that, I want to introduce you to two of my students who really helped me with this particular task when they were undergraduate students at McGill University, Noémie Houberbon and Hallie Fisher. And I'm going to let them narrate some of this work because they were so intimately involved in it and it's a labor of love. I'm going to let them explain to you how this entire story unfolds together with the results. And when we come back from their little description, I'm going to summarize this for you and contextualize it further with the clinical neuroscience of suggestion. So I want you to listen carefully as I thank my two young students, Noémie Houberbon and Hallie Fisher.
In this experiment, we investigated whether a hypnotic suggestion to see additional information could make a difficult visual task easier. To learn more about the visual task, see the overview and results on the home screen. Individuals likely to respond to hypnotic suggestion make up approximately 10 to 15% of the population. Every person falls along a continuum of suggestibility, which can be measured with scales such as the Harvard Group Scale of Hypnotic Susceptibility. The scale ranges from 0 to 12. People falling within the 0 to 3 range are very unlikely to respond to hypnotic suggestion, while those within the 9 to 12 range are very suggestible. We recruited 16 highly suggestible individuals and 16 less suggestible individuals to participate in this study. Participants completed an adaptation of the Occluded diamond task, which we named MoTrack. They played with an interactive demonstration of a pentagon moving with and without occluders. After the demo, participants completed 6 practice trials to make sure they understood what it meant to MoTrack. They were asked to work quickly and accurately as they MoTracked 36 square trials, randomized between 18 clockwise and 18 counterclockwise trials, and 36 triangle trials, randomized between 12 clockwise, 12 counterclockwise, and 12 directionless trials. Directionless motion may sound counterintuitive, but as you can see here, the triangle appears to grow and decrease in size without moving in a circular path. About a week after MoTracking at home, participants came to the lab to receive a hypnotic suggestion to visualize the occluders. Now under this suggestion, participants MoTracked a second time. We interviewed a subset of participants whose accuracy was either much higher or lower than the mean. To see the results of the experiment, see the Overview and Results section on the home screen. When viewing this animation, most people see 2 pairs of lines moving in opposite directions. One pair moves diagonally from the top left to the bottom right of the screen, while the other pair moves from the top right to the bottom left. But what happens if we add something to the animation? Suddenly you see a square moving clockwise. Are those really the same lines you saw before, though? Yes, they are. Let's see it again. When occluders cover the invisible corners of the square, you see it moving in a circular path. This is known as the Occluded diamond task. Why do such small additions lead to huge changes in our visual perception? Our brain takes the available information and tries to interpret it. Without occluders, we view the lines as separate entities moving independently of one another. However, with occluders, our brain adds the motion of each pair to create one coherent motion of a square moving clockwise. Other shapes show the same effect too. Again, it is difficult to see the direction of the triangle without occluders, but when they're added, you can instantly see the motion. In fact, it's hard not to see it. When people are asked to indicate the direction of motion without visible occluders, they perform poorly. We collected data from over 100 individuals and found that they were correct on average only 36% of the time and responded within approximately 2 seconds. However, with visible occluders, participants perform quickly and accurately. On average, they were correct 95% of the time and responded within approximately 1 second. Prior studies investigating this visual paradigm have found similar results. So the addition of visual occluders can make an otherwise difficult task quite easy, but is there some other way to increase performance without actually adding the visual occluders? The answer seems to be yes, and we're not just referring to practice. In fact, we found that practice reduced the length of time it took participants to respond, but it did not significantly increase accuracy. Using this visual paradigm, we investigated whether a hypnotic suggestion to see these visual occluders could create the illusion that they were there and increase performance on the task. We recruited 32 participants, 16 who were likely to respond to a hypnotic suggestion, and 16 who were not. For a complete description of the methodology, visit the Methods section available on the home screen. If highly suggestible individuals respond to the suggestion to see occluders, they should perform similarly to individuals who complete the task with occluders. We also expect that less suggestible individuals will not respond to the suggestion to see occluders and perform similarly to those who complete the task without them. And here is what we found. Both highly suggestible individuals and less suggestible individuals performed poorly when they completed the task for the first time at home. Performance with suggestion was much different. Although both groups responded faster under suggestion, highly suggestible individuals were accurate almost 80% of the time, while less suggestible individuals showed no increase in accuracy. In fact, their scores decreased slightly. You may notice that under suggestion, highly suggestible individuals did not perform as well as those who motracked with occluders. This may indicate that suggestion works as a facilitator, but that it is more effective for some rather than others. While previous studies report that only 4% of highly suggestible individuals are capable of responding to a suggestion involving hallucination, our results propose that this percentage may be larger, or that the phenomenon is much more complex than we had previously thought. In any case, it seems that for specific people, suggestion is in fact capable of adding information to a visual scene, making a difficult task easier.
Now, it might seem like this is very easy breezy stuff, and we know everything that we need to know about the occluded diamond task, but that's not the case. As a matter of fact, we know that there are many elements that are at play here, including brightness and the size of the aperture and the nature of the occluder and how the masks are designed and visual angles and viewing distance, and all these things are extremely important to understand how this particular thing happens. Just to give you an appreciation beyond the suggestion, or unrelated to the suggestion, I want you to understand that visually this is a very complex thing, and I'd like to take you on a little tour that would demonstrate to you the visual parameters, the psychophysical parameters that actually influence some of these effects. Consider the following visual image, and what you see is a little aperture through which you can see something is moving in the back. So everything is black except for one little edge that is moving diagonally in the background. Try to figure out, as I show you more and more information through apertures, what is actually happening in the background and whether your brain can actually compose the picture that is going on in the background. Here is two apertures, or here are two apertures that are showing you something that is happening. You're looking at the same image. It's the same image all the time, but every time I'm showing you a different part of it. Can you try to construct, can you let your brain construct all the visual information from what's happening in the back? Here are another two, and by looking at these two apertures, you can actually begin to tell that maybe there's more than one element that is moving about, and you're trying to understand also the interaction between these elements. Again, one aperture, but now I'm showing you the aperture at a different location. So you can glean information about that area of the image. And two apertures, again, as I did before, but now the two apertures are looking at the two objects and the relationship between them. And you can tell the two objects apart by their color. Now, it is going to be very difficult for you taking all these things together and integrating them into the whole picture, which is this. So basically, just looking at the different apertures, although it gives you quite a bit of information about what's going on, it's very difficult from information that is very partial, such as this and this and this, not to let alone from information that has two edges, or this, or this, to conclude the big picture, which is this. So here is our familiar setup of dancing lines. And of course, we are familiar with the possibility of imposing the occluders like so. And once we put the occluders on, we can quickly see the direction. But what I didn't show you is that you can actually play with the visual characteristics of this task. So for example, you can make the lines dimmer. And as you can see, when you make the lines dimmer, this is very dim, or you can make it, halfway through, or you can make it in between, or all the way brighter. And these situations show us what is actually happening in the brain in response to these stimuli. Now, technically, you could also change direction, and when you do, it takes sometimes a little bit of doing in order to see that the direction actually changed by imposing the occluders again. So it's only when you impose the occluders that you can see it, but sometimes you can do it by just making things a bit dimmer. And some people claim that here they can see the motion, or here. So the psychophysics of this illusion is actually quite complex. We know that the dancing lines on their own are difficult. It's difficult to see cogent or cohesive motion, but the second we put the occluders, the motion becomes very, very clear. Now, how about if I took these lines and instead of putting regular occluders of the kind that you've seen before, I put some fancy ones, and as a result, something happens to your visual system and the occluders now are not doing enough, and you're still unable to see the direction of motion. I can play with the contrast bar and make it very, very dim. By making it dim, I make the task a little bit easier compared to when I make it bright. But as a matter of fact, if I use narrow apertures, or if I use wide apertures, different things happen to your visual processing. Same is true for round apertures. The fact of the matter is that playing around with the apertures, with the contrast, brightness, and with the occluders changes the task quite a bit. See again how difficult it is to work with these kind of occluders. It's very interesting to note that we have a neurofeedback technique available to us now, where we can definitely do this with live patients or participants, where they come in and we can measure what's happening in their brain and take the measurement and feed it into them with a visual display. So in this particular case, you see a participant sitting in a chair with a MEG scanner on top of their head. Magnetoencephalography is the technique here. Looks a little bit like an inverted toilet on top of your head, but it's harmless and it's non-invasive. It allows us to measure very small magnetic fields from the brain, and we can feed the activity that we're measuring into a screen that appears and shows in real time what the brain activity is. The advantage of these kind of techniques is we can actually teach people how to change their brain, maybe in result, as a result of suggestion, maybe as a result of very slight or subtle kind of behavioral nuances. And this is something that has been very little explored. Unfortunately, most of the work that has been done with neurofeedback EEG for clinical purposes has been shown to be not different from placebo effects, in the sense that most of the stuff that is happening is no different whether you show people their own veridical, their true neurofeedback image, or if you show them somebody else's brain, like an indifferent brain. That tells us that the effect comes more from what the people are expecting or from what they're thinking, and less from what is actually happening. But this was true only for very simple paradigms that involve EEG neurofeedback. There's reason to think that for fMRI neurofeedback and maybe for MEG neurofeedback, the results are going to be more promising. The bottom line here is very simple. We are only at the beginning of the marriage of technology with suggestion, putting together these two very powerful kind of trajectories in order to come up with some powerful and important insights into how suggestion changes and molds our brains. In this particular case, what I want to do is describe to you a very unusual study that I did a few years ago at McGill University, whereby I collected a whole bunch of medical debris. In other words, these were medical devices that we threw away. The hospital where I work, the Montreal Neurological Institute in Montreal, Canada, we basically collected a whole bunch of things that were about to be discarded, and we created this machine that does nothing. It was like sort of a placebo machine, but it looked like it was some kind of a brain scanner. So you can see in this particular slide that we have a dome. We took the dome from a hair salon that was throwing away some old equipment, and we put together all these devices that do absolutely nothing. So dials and lights and switches and cables and electrodes and all these things. It does absolutely nothing. And we put some clips of the brain and some sounds, and we tried to convince people that because this was taking place at the Montreal Neurological Institute, that this is actually a state-of-the-art machine that is currently in some kind of an experimental launch phase. And people came in, and we were demonstrating to them the concept of neuroenchantment. So the idea of neuroenchantment is that when you think that a particular device or a particular technology is really very, very far advanced, you automatically treat it like magic. And in many ways, this is magic. It's something that people find very difficult to explain. So they take this particular machine and they think that it can actually tell us, the scientists, a great deal about what's happening in the brain as a result of this, but they also change their behavior. They also begin to behave and are susceptible to suggestions that we're giving them, and as a result they can change their behavior. We have been able to demonstrate using neuroenchantment techniques such as this one and using other scanners that are slightly more realistic that people, for example, who suffer from all kinds of skin conditions, where you have a lot of eczema or a lot of inflamed skin or dermatitis or extremely debilitating conditions where no drugs can help, or dermatologists are at their wits' end. It's very clear that these things can be very helpful. They come, they are engaged with the machine that does nothing, but they don't know that, and as a result, their skin clears as a result of suggestion that we're making that this is going to make them better. The same is true with some pilot studies that we did with Tourette Syndrome. In Tourette Syndrome, for example, particularly children, but also adults, have a tendency to have all kinds of incontrollable tic or semi-controllable tics, sometimes vocal tics, sometimes shrieks, all kinds of behavior that is, includes symptoms. Usually it's comorbid with ADHD, with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and Tourette syndrome is the kind of debilitating disease where most of the drugs that we have they come at a very large cost, and the cost is usually side effects such as cognitive dulling and weight gain and tardive dyskinesia and all kinds of things that are really undesirable. In this particular case, what we can do is we can create a situation where we suggest to people that these machines that are really false machines, I mean, they're sham, kind of contraptions, but that they can suck out their tics, that they can do things to melt down their tics. And as a result, we can demonstrate that these kids or these adults tic far less. And we can also see a qualitative change in their tics, because usually in Tourette's, when you don't tic for a while and then you're free to tic, you have some kind of a rebound effect. In this particular case, we don't see a rebound effect, which suggests to us that there's a different brain mechanism that is involved, because they're under the impression that they are not doing this, the machine is doing this for them. This is opening a whole new window to questions such as, what do we do with free will, with consciousness? How do we tap with suggestion these particular components, these particular mechanisms, and what is the underlying neurological structure and neurological substrate of these things? In conclusion, I would like to tell you, other than the fact that I enjoyed tremendously sharing my research with you, I'd like to tell you that what we are doing right now is not just at the cusp of technology in terms of neuroimaging and at the cusp of behavioral science in terms of trying to illuminate what suggestion does to human behavior and to the human brain, but we are beginning to understand the difference of, or the impact of, top-down control that starts at the brain and at what we're thinking between our ears, and how it affects physiology and how it affects the immune system, coming down, versus bottom-up control, which is what conventional medicine, neurobiology, and most of the life sciences has been concerned with. I thank you so much for listening to my talk. I apologize for having to do this in some kind of an online medium, and I want to thank very much the Chinese organizer, my colleagues, for inviting me. I hope you have a great conference, and thank you very much for listening.